thanks very much. Sorry, you've got to hear from me again. Sorry. So this section then is going to be around whether onshore wind has got a role for us. And just picking up on a clarification that I was just asked in one of the groups, this is about onshore wind being part of a mix. I don't think we're suggesting, or anybody would suggest, that only one technology is the way to do this. So this is as part of a mix. So you'll remember this slide from a few moments ago. We were talking about the need to decarbonise these three sort of significant areas of our economy: industry and commercial, transport and domestic, and we need more electricity in order to do this. So these are different types of renewable energy projects that we could have in the mix. So you will notice on that top left, we've got the solar panels that I talked about. That again, there is the ground mount. So those panels are taking energy from the sun and converting it into electricity. Then you've got onshore wind next to that one, which is a wind turbine that's deployed on the land and makes the most of the wind. Next to it, you've got offshore wind, which is a type of technology which takes the wind turbines and puts them out at sea. Then on that top row, you've got tidal and wave. So that wave and tidal technologies are still a little bit more innovative and at an earlier stage of development than the other technologies on there, but they take they're deployed off the shore and off the coast rather, and make the most of the tidal, either the tidal range or the tidal stream, so the speed at which the water's moving. And then for wave energy, it benefits from they take energy rather from the waves when you've got a good wave height. You've got hydro in the bottom left, and you've got anaerobic digestion, you've got biomass and nuclear. So I'll pick up those four in a moment on the next slide. So these are all different ways of generating electricity. And when we're thinking about Devon needing to decarbonise and to get more electricity that's renewable, we could make a decision to just rely on really big national schemes. And what I mean by big national schemes are projects over a certain threshold where they contribute to our national infrastructure. So they connect into the grid you may well have all heard of National Grid. So they largely run the electricity networks. It plugs into that level, but then we've got a level down from that where you may have heard of Western Power Distribution. So they are the electricity network operator in our area. So you can broadly split the two schemes as to whether or not they plug in to the National Grid level or to the Western Power one. So where area of the country it might not be Western Power, but for the purpose of this, if we're thinking about it that way. And so you could rely on just going for the big ones. So that would be your really big offshore wind farms or a large nuclear power station. But we do know that we've got good resources. We know that we've got good wind and we've got good solar resource, and that therefore there's an opportunity for us to actually export that to the grid. So plug it in at Western Power's level, and then off it goes and can be there using for other people to use it in other counties. And that £2 billion figure has come up again there. So we spend £2 billion annually on energy. If we then capture some of it at that more local level, we can keep some of that money within our borders, which will then, as I've said before, allow us to provide jobs and skills, opportunities for local people, and will allow people to get involved so that you could then influence the projects. So you could help, or local people could help design the projects, could help decide how the funds get spent, or the profits rather, into other areas. So for example, you end up with community benefit funds set up at the more local level, which can then be used to do good things in the local community, rather than it just being large developers doing really big projects nationally that will ultimately provide low carbon electricity, but you'd lose out on some of those other benefits. So if we think about what these different technologies that I didn't cover on the previous slide, whether or not they could work at scale for Devon. So the reason I didn't cover it before is because we sort of don't think they can really. So anaerobic digestion, this involves growing energy crops and then using those crops to produce energy, but this takes land away from food production, can be really bad for wildlife, and it's not a particularly efficient fuel. Hydro, the opportunities are really limited in Devon because of just of the way that the land is here, and it's quite difficult to get through planning, and we need to protect wildlife, so it's just not really an option for large-scale projects here. Nuclear, which is arguably not low carbon because of or it's not zero carbon because of the scale of the buildings, the engineering required, and the waste that is produced from nuclear afterwards, and the way that that needs to be managed. There are no large nuclear or no nuclear plans for Devon. There's one that you're probably familiar with from the news and such, in Hinkley Point in Somerset, and it's a very expensive energy source. And then biomass. So this is where you would have a crop of wood fuel and you would burn it essentially, but it's an inefficient use of land, and there are again concerns about how sustainable that is, because you may well be producing wood purely for this purpose. So then that leaves us with the other four types of technology that I did talk about. So solar, offshore, onshore, and tidal and wave. So there's a mix here. So you've got, so we're thinking about the energy system as a mix rather. So you've got solar. Again, that picture is a ground mount solar. Solar, the price of solar has come down, so it's now £44 per megawatt hour, sort of roughly. So it's a very affordable source of electricity. The capacity factor is between the 10 and 20% mark, so it's not as the capacity factor is a bit lower than offshore wind, but it's still a pretty good option for us. You can combine it with animals grazing, so you don't have to give over the whole field to onshore to ground mount solar. You can you can have the sites as multi-purpose, and there's lots of opportunities for skills development in there for maintenance and installing as well. So just below that then I've got onshore wind, so this can be deployed at a variety of different scales, so you can have quite small turbines and then quite large ones. The capacity factor is 26% roughly on that, so again it is better than solar. You need, probably goes without saying, but it needs to be a windy location, which we do have quite a lot of wind in Devon. It needs to be away from people. What I mean by that is you need to site it kind of away from other tall buildings so that they don't steal each other's wind, or the building doesn't block the wind for the onshore wind turbine, and to sort of address any concerns about noise, it needs to be a little bit further away from people. And again, there's lots of opportunities for skills and maintenance, and it is a really affordable form of energy as well. And then just briefly on the other two, so offshore wind, there are sort of early stage thoughts at the moment about projects off the north and south coast of Devon. These are much larger scale projects, so they are a bit more expensive. So they're currently sitting around £57 per megawatt hour, but those costs are falling, and they have fallen quite significantly over time. And they need quite a lot of onshore infrastructure as well in order to connect into the grid. So there's a land use element there, even though it's an offshore project. And then, as I said before, wave and tidal is still at an earlier phase, but it is something that we have great resources for, particularly tidal around the coast of Devon. So there could be an opportunity in the future for that to come as part of the mix. But thinking back again then on onshore wind, particularly with planning hurdles. So there have been challenges, or there are challenges rather, to deploying onshore wind in many areas of the country because of this statement in the National Planning Policy Framework, which I'll just read it verbatim off the slide for you. It says, a proposed wind energy development involving one or more turbines should not be considered acceptable unless it's in an area identified as suitable for wind energy development in the development plan. And following consultation, it can be demonstrated that the planning impacts identified by the affected local community have been fully addressed and the proposal has their backing. So that has meant that lots of projects haven't gone ahead, because if they weren't already identified, or if the area wasn't already identified as being suitable for wind energy, then it's kind of a non-starter. But then that second bit to get backing from the local community is really important. And partly for some of the reasons I mentioned previously, it would make sense to work with the community so that the community can benefit from those skills and the jobs and that money being left within the county. So that did sort of ban schemes for a really long while now, but there really is an opportunity at this point to start to try and work with government to change this if you as the Citizens Assembly think that it could be appropriate. And that linking the sort of last part of that statement to my next bullet point, people on occasion, people do object to wind projects when they're going through planning permission, and these voices do get considered by local planning committees. So there is a need to try and work with the community to ensure that these things can be addressed to then get these projects through. So then just to finish up, so through the interim Devon carbon plan, we've proposed a renewable energy strategy for Devon, which could then help to guide the technology types, whether that's, like we said, some solar, some onshore wind, where they should be, what the ownership models should be for them, and how we can try and generate some of that energy nice and locally so we can all benefit from it. So I think the best place to leave that there is that if you as the Assembly think that Devon should provide more energy locally, we're going to need your help to decide what should be in that strategy, and with particular attention to electricity and the role of onshore wind. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.